On this vote, the yeas are 399, the nays are 0, two-thirds being the affirmative. The rules are suspended, the Senate amendments are agreed to, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. What purpose, gentlemen? Okay. The House will be in order. The House will be in order. Members will take their conversations out of the House and will remove themselves from the aisles. The House will be in order. The House will be in order. Members will remove their conversations from the House. Members and staff will remove their conversations from the House. The House will come to order. For what purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, pursuant to House Resolution 1183, I call up House Resolution 695 with the Senate amendment to the House amendment to the Senate amendment thereto, and I have a motion at the desk.
The clerk will report the title of the bill, designate the Senate amendment to the House amendment to the Senate amendment, and designate the motion.
H.R. 695, an act to amend the National Child Protection Act of 1993 to establish a national criminal history background check system and criminal history review program for certain individuals who, related to their employment, have access to children, the elderly, or individuals with disabilities, and for other purposes. Senate amendment to House amendment to Senate amendment. Mr. Frelinghuysen of New Jersey moves that the House concur in the Senate amendment to the House amendment to the Senate amendment to H.R. 695 with an amendment consisting of the text of Rules Committee Print 115-88.
The House will come to order. Pursuant to House Resolution 1183, the amendment consisting of the text of Rules Committee Print 115-88 shall be considered as read. The motion shall be debatable for 1 hour, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee of Appropriations. The gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Frelinghuysen, and the gentlewoman from New York, Ms. Lowy, each will control 30 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey.
Mr. Chairman, I rise today in support of House amendment to the Senate amendment to House Resolution 695, a bill making further additional continuing appropriations for the fiscal year 2019. This measure keeps our government open until February 8th, 2019, and prevents a costly, destabilizing government shutdown. This continuing resolution reflects the House position on border security and provides $5 billion for the construction of physical barriers at our borders. This is the same amount that was provided in the Homeland Security funding bill approved by the House Appropriations Committee back in July of this year. In addition, this legislation includes $7.8 billion in supplemental funding for disaster relief. Congress has always been responsive to hurricanes and wildfires and typhoons and other natural disasters. And we must continue to do so to help our fellow Americans as they rebuild their lives and livelihoods. I don't support a government shutdown, and I never have. Americans deserve stability and predictability of a government that is 100% operational. I would have much preferred to complete negotiations on our remaining 7 bills with our Senate counterparts, but there were several very challenging issues that remained. As I stated before, a continuing resolution is the last resort when it comes to funding the federal government. I urge my colleagues to vote yes on this bill, and I urge the Senate to do the same, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves the balance of his time. The gentlewoman from New York is recognized.
I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentlewoman is recognized.
Last night, the Senate unanimously passed legislation that would fund our government through February 8th. Democrats are disappointed that Congress would kick the can down the road once again, yet we remain willing to pass that bill to keep the government open. Unfortunately, my friends, even that simple stopgap measure is apparently unacceptable to a president hell-bent on shutting down the government over his wasteful wall. And instead of showing leadership and moving forward with the Senate legislation, despite the president's tweets, House Republicans have caved once again to Trump's political whims. They now have put up this grab bag of legislation that wastes taxpayer dollars, fails to meet the urgent needs of disaster victims, and frankly, my friends, is dead on arrival in the Senate. With all the challenges facing our country, from soaring healthcare costs to crumbling infrastructure, it is inconceivable that Republicans want to spend $5.7 billion on an unnecessary wall that President Trump himself promised Mexico would pay for. Moreover, the disaster supplemental attached to this bill shortchanges nutrition needs in Puerto Rico, needs that were apparent 16 months ago, and Republicans have continued their pattern of denying science by grossly underfunding mitigation and resilience against future disasters caused by climate change. Mr. Speaker, this bill is nothing but another attempt by lame duck Republicans to appease President Trump. It is a fitting final act for the most chaotic and dysfunctional Congress in modern history. I oppose this reckless and irresponsible bill. I urge my colleagues to reject this legislation and instead pass the Senate's clean CR, keep our government open, and prevent a Trump shutdown. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves the balance of her time. The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, pleased to yield a minute to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Dunn.
The gentleman from Florida is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Speaker, just over 2 months ago, Hurricane Michael ravaged the panhandle of Florida. It was a devastating Category 4.9 storm that damaged more than 90% of Tyndall Air Force Base and decimated our agriculture industry and destroyed entire communities. Mr. Speaker, the folks back home in my district, the 2nd District of Florida, are hurting. This supplemental disaster funding is a down payment on getting the hardworking folks in my district back on their feet. This funding by no means is even close to what we will need to completely rebuild, but it is a start. I commend President Trump for remaining steadfast in his commitment to our nation. After Hurricane Michael, President Trump and Vice President Pence came down to the 2nd District and made it clear that we have their support and we will rebuild. Mr. Speaker, I'll continue to fight for the disaster relief funding in the coming months and years because the survivors of Hurricane Michael across the South deserve nothing less. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from New Jersey reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
I'm pleased to yield 2 minutes to the gentlewoman from Ohio, the ranking member of the Energy and Water Subcommittee, Ms. Kaplan.
The gentlewoman from Ohio is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the ranking member, Ms. Lowy of New York, for yielding. And here we are, Mr. Speaker, again and again and again and again. In fact, this is the 9th continuing resolution that the Republicans have punted in this Congress rather than getting the job done. This president claims to be a great deal maker, but what kind of a deal does he even want? He keeps switching the goalposts again and again. It reminds me of a child who flips over a Monopoly board when he realizes he's about to lose. The president's nonsense is compounded by the dysfunction, sadly, of House Republicans. They are about to vote on funding a bill that has no chance of becoming law. Zero chance of becoming law. All of this because they want to waste money on a border wall that Mexico was supposed to pay for and won't work anyway because it's 13th century technology. Imagine billions of dollars being able to pay some of the student loan debt around this country, or help our teachers earn better salaries, or pave the roads and bridges around this country that need repair, or invest in good, clean energy jobs. Take your pick, Mr. President, but $5.7 billion for a wall that won't even work? No thanks. The American people expect so much more of us in this Congress. Sadly, the Republican leadership and this president are attempting 11th hour shenanigans to get a wall that voters across this country clearly, definitely rejected when they sent a new majority to Congress, and frankly, they can't get here fast enough. The American people deserve better. I urge my colleagues to vote no. I thank you, and I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. The gentlewoman from New York reserves. The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I'm pleased to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Buddy Carter.
The gentleman from Georgia is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to discuss the importance of any funding bill, including funding for the border wall, as well as funding for our communities and farmers who have been hit hard by natural disasters. For those of us representing rural communities, we know well how important the agriculture community is, not just to the livelihood of those areas, but to our entire nation. Our farmers are often the unsung heroes of our nation, helping to create and maintain the breadbasket that our country is known for. In short, the American farmer feeds the world. It's not by accident that American agriculture has developed to produce the safest and most abundant food supply in the world. It's through blood, sweat, and tears over generations. In my home state of Georgia, agriculture is our top industry. Blueberries represent a $1 billion industry across Georgia, and the commodity is the backbone of many of our communities. After several hurricanes and other natural disasters, it's past time that Congress takes a stand to support our ag community by addressing their needs. I've been fighting for months to secure the disaster relief needed by our farming community, especially blueberries. Plain and simple, disaster relief funding must be included in any end-of-the-year funding package. Georgia has faced devastating weather recently, including hurricanes and freezes. Georgians at every corner of the state are feeling the impact. Whether it's along the coast or southwest Georgia, the need for disaster funding is very much alive. Our number one responsibility is to our constituents, those who have put their faith in us to do what is right for our districts and for our country. For this reason, Congress should stay here until we get this job done. We need border security, and we cannot kick the can on disaster funding. I urge my colleagues to help us get this to the finish line and to provide the help that millions of Americans are depending on. Vote for our national security. Vote for our farmers and growers who desperately need this disaster assistance. Let's get this done. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from New Jersey reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from New York, the ranking member of the Commerce, Justice, Science Committee, Mr. Serrano.
The gentleman from New York is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentlewoman. For me, this is a very simple thought. It's the same thought I've had all along. This country, of all countries, should not be building a wall. This country, the land of opportunity, the land of freedom, the land where people come to build a new life, should not be building a wall. So what do? There isn't the support necessary for building the wall, for funding it. So at the last moment, we sneak it into a so-called must-pass bill, or otherwise, you shut the government down. But the president has already said that he doesn't mind taking credit or taking responsibility for shutting this government down. This is very simple. People say, well, there's aid here, disaster aid. We've been dealing with this disaster issue now for over a year, and still we don't do the right thing. This is simple for me. We can't build a wall. This wall will be a waste of money. And you know something? I don't know who, but as we speak here, there are people already who know how to get over, through, and under the wall. The wall is not what we need. What we need is immigration reform, and we need another outlook. But lastly, again, I repeat, of all the countries in the world, this is the one that can go down in history as being the greatest democracy when it builds a wall. And in my city, there's a statue that says, give me your tired, give me your poor, but not if they come from Mexico.
Gentleman yields back. The gentlewoman from New York reserves. The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized.
Mr. Chair, I'm pleased to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Wenstrup.
The gentleman from Ohio is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our federal government was founded for one purpose: to fulfill the charges set forth in the Constitution, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty. Lawmakers take an oath to uphold the Constitution. We fail in our sworn duty if we refuse to ensure the sovereignty, security, and well-being of this nation through secure borders. The situation at the border is a serious problem that demands our immediate attention. It's been constantly brushed aside because somewhere along the way, our conversation about border security got muddled. The wall, border patrol, surveillance of human trafficking routes, all of these have been recast exclusively into the context of immigration policy. Border security is indeed a part of immigration policy, but it's much more than that. It's part of keeping drugs off our streets and keeping Americans safe. Our porous borders can allow drugs, cartels, and even terrorists into our nation. An unsecure border makes it impossible for us to enact meaningful immigration reform, as we cannot expect any legal system to work if we do not have control of who is entering. Funding for border security is not a political point. This is about keeping America safe, keeping illicit drugs out of our country, and protecting American families and our own precious lives. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Back, the gentleman from New Jersey reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to yield 2.5 minutes to the gentleman from North Carolina, the ranking member of the Transportation, Housing, Urban Development Committee, Subcommittee, Mr.
The
Price.
gentleman from North Carolina is recognized for 2.5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, once again we find ourselves only hours away from the third Republican shutdown of the Trump presidency. And we know how we got here. 7 key appropriations bills, 6 of them teed up with bipartisan support, could have, should have been passed in September, or for that matter, this very week. Instead, Republicans came up with a 6-week continuing resolution, and now they've backed down even on that. Instead of taking yes for an answer following last night's Senate vote on this continuing resolution, the best House Republicans could come up with is a craven attempt to placate the president and his anti-immigrant demagoguery. Despite telling us for years that Mexico would pay for this grandiose border wall, the president and the speaker have decided that fulfilling this foolhardy campaign promise is worth shutting down the government. The president said so himself last week. I will take the mantle, he said. I will be the one to shut it down. To add insult to injury, as though throwing billions in taxpayer money at the president's wall wasn't bad enough, the Republican majority now has cynically added much-needed disaster recovery funds in the final hour, despite knowing full well that this bill is no more than a political stunt. Mr. Speaker, we know we need these disaster funds. I've repeatedly stressed that. The urgency of increased funding for the millions in my state still reeling from disasters. But it is cynical, it is deceptive, it is cruel to hold the needs of these people hostage to fulfill President Trump's anti-immigrant wish list. Our nation faces many pressing needs: disaster recovery, comprehensive immigration reform. But the best Republicans can give us is political games and Twitter tantrums. We have a responsibility to our constituents to keep the government open and providing cover to the president's impulses. My colleagues are failing on that responsibility. So let's end this charade. Let's pass the Senate continuing resolution, and let's fulfill our responsibility, our most basic responsibility, to fund our government.
Back, the gentlewoman from New York reserves. The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, pleased to yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Rothfuss.
The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank the gentleman for yielding. And Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of this legislation, which will continue operations for several federal government agencies and importantly appropriate funds to be used in securing the southern border. We have talked for years about securing our border. This is important for the entire nation. And my perspective comes from representing a district hard hit with the opioid epidemic. Mexico and the United States have a mutual interest in securing our border. Heroin, fentanyl, methamphetamines, and other narcotics flow northbound, while importantly, illicit cash is flowing southbound. This illicit cash is fueling a reign of terror by Mexican drug cartels that have murdered over 200,000 Mexican citizens over the last 10 years, and only 5% of them have been prosecuted. They've killed priests, they've killed journalists, they've killed students, they've killed each other. There are mass graves all over Mexico. Mr. Speaker, we need to secure that border for the benefit of both countries. It's past time we do this. And I ask support for this legislation and yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from New Jersey reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to yield 3 minutes to the gentlewoman from California, the ranking member of the Homeland Security Subcommittee, Ms. Roybal.
The gentleman from California is recognized for 3 minutes.
Okay. Mr. Speaker, Democrats understand the critical responsibility we have to keep our government funded and serve the needs of the American people. But House Republicans are driving our nation to the brink of another disastrous government shutdown. Republicans who control the House, the Senate, and the White House have the power to keep our government open. Yet at a time of great economic uncertainty and right in the middle of the holiday season, Republicans are refusing to stand up to the president, who made it clear he'd be proud to shut down the government if he cannot force American taxpayers to spend billions of dollars on an immoral, ineffective, and expensive wall. The fact is, serious homeland security vulnerabilities will not be addressed if the president is allowed to squander $5.7 billion on a border wall. This includes not being able to hire more law enforcement agents to focus on opioid, gang, trade, and child exploitation investigations. No funding to recapitalize the Coast Guard's air and sea fleets, including the procurement of our first heavy icebreaker since the 1970s. As the Arctic ice recedes, Russia, China, and other countries are winning the race to lay claim to the vast resources of that region, where at times there is no U.S. presence. There will be no funding to hire additional custom officers to intercept illicit drugs and other contraband, almost all of which comes into our country through the ports of entry. And, Mr. Chairman, there will be no increased funding for first responder grants to help states and localities better prepare and respond to terrorism and disasters of every kind. All of these funding needs have strong bipartisan support, yet these critical national security needs simply cannot be met if we waste $5.7 billion on an overly expensive and unnecessary border wall. On Election Day, the American people sent a message that they want a government that works for them. Unfortunately, House Republicans continue to ignore them and are steering our nation into a Trump shutdown. The Senate passed a clean, bipartisan CR extension to keep our government open. It's time for House Republicans to do the same on behalf of the American people. I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. The gentlewoman from New York reserves. The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized.
I'm pleased to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Culbertson, a member of the House Appropriations Committee.
The gentleman from Texas recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Speaker. I hope my colleagues will join me tonight in voting for this important bill to keep our word to the American people. Keeping our word to our constituents is one of our most important responsibilities, and the President and those of us that ran to secure the southern border promised that we would see this wall built. in those parts of the border where it makes sense. Where we, in this, relying on the good judgment of our sector chiefs down on the border to tell us whether a fence makes the most sense, or a wall, or perhaps a weir dam. In places on the Rio Grande River where you simply dam up the water, where the local sector chief believes that's probably the best way to secure the border, we're going to follow that recommendation. But this $5 billion that is set aside in this bill for construction of border fencing and a wall is consistent with what the full Appropriations Committee did this summer. We debated this extensively, Mr. Speaker. We all talked about this. This is not a new number. This is something that the full committee voted on and approved when the Appropriations Committee voted the Homeland Security bill out of committee this summer. This is consistent with what the committee did. This keeps our word to our constituents, and we're also keeping our word to those Americans who suffered as a result of their disasters in California with the wildfires, and the flooding that occurred from the hurricanes. And I want to thank Chairman Flinghuysen again for his support for the people of Texas and Southeast Texas who suffered from Hurricane Harvey. It was my privilege as the representative for District 7 in West Houston to help spearhead that package, recovery package for Hurricane Harvey that brought together the delegations from Florida and Texas. We put together, with your help, Mr. Chairman, the largest hurricane recovery package in the history of the United States, and made sure that the people that need that money got it as soon as possible. That's another reason it's so important to pass this bill, to make sure the flood-ravaged people of Florida get the help they need. But above all, this is about keeping our word to our constituents, something I've been proud to do in representing the people of West Houston in District 7 for 18 years, and I urge my colleagues to join me in supporting this important piece of legislation tonight.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from New Jersey reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to yield 2 minutes to the gentlewoman from California, senior member of the Appropriations Committee, Ms. Lee.
Gentleman from California is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. First, let me thank the gentlelady for yielding and for your leadership on so many issues. I rise this evening in opposition to this bill and really this hateful and un-American demand for $5 billion to build President Trump's border wall. Let's be clear. President Trump and congressional Republicans aren't negotiating. They are holding our government hostage and demanding this wasteful, expensive wall as their ransom. Republicans control the House, the Senate, and the White House. You would think that they could at least keep the government open. But instead of passing the Senate-passed clean, continuing resolution to prevent a shutdown, Republicans want to vote on this unnecessary border wall. Mr. Speaker, this is completely irresponsible. Federal workers rely on their paychecks, especially during the holidays. People have planned national park trips over the holidays. Is President Trump really going to shut down the government in the midst of Americans during this holiday season, during their vacation, during their time off with their families? How sinister and mean-spirited can the president and our Republican colleagues be? But this wouldn't be the first time that the Republicans were manufacturing a crisis. The Republican-led shutdown in 2013 cost our economy $24 billion. If President Trump shuts down the government for the third time this year, I might add, he will sabotage our economy. So instead of pushing forward with this bill, House Republicans should allow a vote on the Senate-passed continuing resolution to keep the government open. I urge my colleagues to vote no on this disastrous bill, and I thank you and yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. The gentlewoman from New York reserves. Members are reminded to refrain from engaging in personalities toward the president. The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I'm pleased to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Heiss.
The gentleman from Georgia is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank my friend and thank him for his great leadership. Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of this bill and urge my colleagues to come together in support of securing our nation's southern border. We finally now have an opportunity before us that enables us to take a step in resolving the immigration and border crisis, frankly one that is growing daily in its scope and complexity, and largely because of the inaction of this body, but we have the opportunity now to change that. The $5 billion requested by the President is a relatively small amount when we consider the federal government's discretionary spending this year is at a whopping $1.3 trillion. That comes to about $2.5 million a minute. So if you do the math, this $5 billion comes to less than a day and a half worth of federal spending, about 33 hours. So to give people some degree of comparison, in late 2016, the Department of Transportation awarded a little over $1 billion grant to the city of San Diego to expand its trolley service 11 miles. That's roughly $100 million per mile for something that the DOT estimated only 25,000 people would use. So if we can spend $1 billion on a trolley for 11 miles that not very few people will even use, certainly we can spend $5 billion to do something that's going to benefit and protect our nation and our border. And wherever walls have been built on our border, whether we're dealing with San Diego or El Paso or Tucson or wherever, the walls have been effective tremendously. So the border wall in itself is no magic bullet. There's some other things we need to do, closing the asylum loopholes, for example, making E-Verify mandatory, ending chain migration. But this is our opportunity, both to secure the border and give.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Thank you. I urge support for this bill.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from New Jersey reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to yield 3 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from Maryland, the Democratic whip, Mr. Hoyer.
The gentleman from Maryland is recognized for 3 minutes.
I thank the gentlelady for yielding. What a sad day. Mr. Chairman, I feel badly that you are leaving on this note. I know it is not your wish. I know that if you were in charge, we would have reached agreement. I know under your leadership, we didn't pass them, 6 bills were forged in a bipartisan way. Not our bills, your bills. And ladies and gentlemen, the 7th bill is also agreed to, save one item. So that approximately 96% of the legislation has been agreed to by both sides, and the United States Senate has passed a continuing resolution based upon those bills by voice vote. And yet here we are, twisting in the wind at 7 p.m. on the day before the government shuts down. What a sad performance. What a regrettable lack of responsibility. How we have undermined the faith of our people, treated the federal employee terribly, and given cause for the rest of the world to think, what are they doing? There is not one person on the Republican side of the aisle that believes, if they pass this bill, that it will be accepted by the Senate. Not one of you believes that. And so we are playing political games here to pander to the President of the United States, who sadly rejected a compromise that was reached by all of us. The majority leader of your party and the Speaker were for this compromise. We were for this compromise, and the Senate was for this compromise. One person. Why are we here? I will shut down the government, absolutely. I am proud to shut down the government. That is what the President of the United States said just a few days ago. And today, he put the entire Congress in a tizzy. How sad it is that the Republican leadership of this Congress and the last Congress have consistently been unable to meet their fiscal responsibilities. John Boehner brought a bill to open up the government May I have one additional minute? To open
The
up the
gentleman is
government.
recognized for an additional 1 minute.
And sadly, only 78 Republicans would follow their leadership. Mr. Boehner, Mr. Cantor, Mr. McCarthy. Only 78. And the rest, including the present director of OMB, voted to keep government shut down. So I'm not surprised that we're here. But it is sad that we are here acting so irresponsibly. If we have one duty as we come here, it is to have our government function effectively for our people. And we are failing tonight. And this is a pretense. This bill is going nowhere. The Senate won't accept it. Now, perhaps the Senate will send it back, amended. Perhaps. But ladies and gentlemen, we think, adults. Let's act responsibly. Defeat this bill.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentlewoman from New York reserves. Gentleman from New Jersey is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I'm pleased to recognize Mr. Poliquin of the great state of Maine for 2 minutes.
Gentleman from Maine is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, very much. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll tell you, I don't quite understand what the other side is saying today. Talking about politics and being irresponsible and not compassionate. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Here in the House of Representatives and in the Senate, we take an oath to support and defend our Constitution. That means keeping our families safe. There is no more important responsibility. Nothing more important than keeping our families safe. That means rebuilding our military. And yes, it also means securing our borders and knowing who is entering in our country. I don't know why it's so hard to make a distinction between what is legal and what is illegal entry. I come from Maine. We have a 600-mile border with Canada. They're great neighbors. But I'll tell you, I feel for the people down the southwest part of our country. It is common sense to secure our borders, know who's entering in our country. And I'll tell you, my heart goes out to these folks who have made their way from Central America to the other side of the border fence with Texas in Mexico wanting to come in here. But we don't know who they are. Beyond the fact that we do know, according to Homeland Security, there are 600 folks who have criminal backgrounds. Now these folks, no sir. Now these folks have been offered asylum and work permits by the country of Mexico, every single one of them, and they have refused. And now they want to enter our country. Fine, but they've got to do it legally. Now in rural Maine, we have been hard hit by this opioid epidemic. Nothing more difficult than this issue in rural America. 80% of this terrible, cheap heroin, deadly heroin, which is a substitute for the opioid pills, comes over that southwest border. House should pass this bill and secure our borders. It is common sense. The best Christmas gift for America is securing our borders, and I support this bill.
And the gentleman is no longer recognized.
Thank you, sir.
The gentleman from New Jersey reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to yield 2 minutes to the gentlewoman from Connecticut, the ranking member of the Labor, Health, Human Services, and Education Subcommittee, Ms. DeLauro.
The gentlewoman from Connecticut is recognized for 2 minutes.
If they thought, the other side of the aisle thought that this was such an important bill, you should have brought it to the floor. That's what we do here. I rise in opposition to the amendment before us. Staggering that the Republicans have the United States careening toward another government shutdown. And the American people do not want a shutdown. Hundreds of thousands of workers will be sent home. Many others will continue to work without pay. Parks, museums closed down. In fact, according to the estimates by the Connecticut Mirror, this Trump shutdown, and he does own it, could impact as many as 1,500 federal employees in Connecticut, and right before the holidays. Nor do the American people want a wall. It does not reflect our values as a nation. Experts are telling us it is not an effective use of taxpayer dollars with regards to maintaining border security. It's money we should be spending on working families, on roads and schools in our communities, not a fence in the desert. And it's not just a border wall, which was a non-starter. Disaster relief provisions of the CR are inadequate, failing to meet the communities devastated by disaster, risking the future of children who suffer from severe trauma, and communities still picking up the pieces. It leaves out $600 million of anti-hunger and nutrition support for women, infants, and children in Puerto Rico. That is unacceptable. The President and the Republicans have two choices: perform the basic job of governing, keep the government open, or perform for Fox News. They have chosen the latter. It is an outrageous tantrum. My friends, this is not government for the people and by the people. It is government by tantrum and tweets. Please vote no.
Chairman yields back. The gentlewoman from New York reserves. The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I'm pleased to recognize the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Tom Rice.
For how much time?
For 2 minutes.
The gentleman from South Carolina is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Opioids and illegal immigration, two cancers of a porous southern border, and my constituents have had enough. Illegal immigration holds down wages and diminishes our middle class. The Democrats say they're for border security. They just don't want to pay for it. Empty words. It's funny. Mr. Schumer voted for a border wall in 2006, but he's against it now. Why? Because our president wants it? Empty words. 150 people in my district in 2017 were killed by opioid overdoses. My law enforcement agencies tell me that 85% of those drugs come across our porous southern border. You say you're for border security, but you don't want to pay for it. Empty words. Playing politics. 150 people in my district. In your district too. It's a cancer. It doesn't just affect my district. It's across this entire country. And you say you're for border security, and you won't take any action to stop it. Mr. Speaker, it's gone on long enough. Illegal immigration holds down wages, stretches our social safety net, holds down our middle class. The opioids kill people across our country. It is a cancer and it's growing. It's not even leveling off, it's growing. Killing people in my district and yours too. Empty words. Shame on you. I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from New Jersey reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, as I yield to Mr. Bishop of Georgia, I want to make it clear that most of the opioids, the drugs, are coming through the ports of entry. And I'm very happy to yield 2 minutes. The gentleman from Georgia, the ranking member of the Agricultural Subcommittee, Mr.
The gentleman from Georgia is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentlelady for yielding. Mr. Speaker, as a legislative body, one of Congress's core responsibilities is to keep the government open and working for the people. Another core responsibility is to help communities that are struck by disaster to recover and rebuild. The continuing resolution before us is not a sufficient response to these vital needs. It includes only token disaster relief for rural communities and farmers in middle and southwest Georgia that were devastated by Hurricane Michael and other disasters that occurred in 2018. It does not include a number of provisions that were being negotiated. It includes only $8 million for impacted rural communities instead of $150 million. It does not change the percentage of recovery of crop losses from 85% to those with crop insurance to 90%, and from 65% for those without crop insurance to 70%. It includes less than half of the estimated need for the Emergency Forest Restoration Program, $200 million instead of $480 million. It does not include the lower threshold for pecan tree mortality to 7.5%, but it leaves it at the current level of 15%, which is totally inadequate. It does not include the most recent estimate for the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands disaster nutrition, which is $8.5 million instead of $9.3 million. And finally, it does not include any of the $600 million for Puerto Rico nutrition assistance. Unfortunately, it does include significant funding for a misguided and wasteful wall on our southwestern border. This wall will do nothing to improve our nation's security and is a serious misallocation of taxpayer dollars. It should have been stripped from this important funding legislation and considered separately. Furthermore, this legislation is dead on arrival in the Senate. We must do better. We must meet the significant needs of my Georgia constituents and Americans across the country that are still rebuilding from Hurricane Michael. And we must pass a government bill that would avoid the damage caused by government shutdown. I urge my colleagues to reject this bill.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I'm pleased to yield 2 minutes to gentleman from Alabama, a member of the committee, Mr. Adderholt.
Gentleman from Alabama is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Speaker, I rise to support the disaster supplemental package, especially as it relates to agriculture and rural development. As chairman of the Agricultural Subcommittee, I've worked with the ranking member. I've worked with other members who represent districts that have been impacted by this historical weather that's related to disasters to support bipartisan relief to the farming and to the rural communities. From hurricanes to volcano activity to deadly wildfires, this supplemental provides federal financial relief to those most negatively impacted by the natural disasters. While many of us favor limited government, there are times like these where federal assistance is needed and where it is warranted. Members from the Southeast to California to Hawaii to communities in between represent districts with agriculture and rural constituents who have suffered devastating losses to their livelihood. In my home state of Alabama, for example, producers of cotton to vegetables have lost everything. In Georgia, Florida, North Carolina, and South Carolina, producers of crop or livestock lost their source of income now and into the future. At a time when hardworking farmers invested limited dollars and countless hours of labor, their livelihoods were wiped out within hours by a once-in-a-lifetime storm. These farmers and producers take financial risks that are unknown to most Americans. Even if the delivery of this critical relief is delayed by the normal administrative process, lenders and bankers must see a signal from the federal government that financial support will be coming before the next crop year. I want to highlight just briefly those parts of the package that relate to agriculture and rural communities. The agriculture portion of the bill totals $1.4 billion. A majority of the funding supports the hardworking farmers and ranchers who produce crops and livestock for food on our dinner tables. The package also provides funding for critical watersheds damaged by the hurricanes and fires. Lastly, the funding provides for basic nutritional needs for those who qualify in the Northern Mariana Islands. In closing, I ask my colleagues to support this bill as we build America's communities impacted by these natural disasters.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from New Jersey reserves. The gentlewoman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to yield 2 minutes to the gentlewoman from Minnesota, the ranking member of the Interior Subcommittee, Ms. McCullough.
Gentlewoman from Minnesota is recognized for 2 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in opposition to this new Republican continuing resolution that is going nowhere. House Republicans continue to cater to every whim and Twitter temper tantrum that the President throws, abdicating their responsibility to the American people. Last night, the Senate passed by voice vote, a continuing resolution, and the House was ready to follow suit today. And the President said he would sign it. But rather than keeping his word, the President appears to have put the demands of conservative pundits over the American people, causing a government shutdown. It is time for Republican leadership to stand up to the President and pass the agreed-upon continuing resolution that will bring back economic certainty to our economy. The President has still not used the money that Congress appropriated for border security last year. Yet Republicans are ready to give him the same amount of funds this year, and we agree to that. But there is no reason to waste $5.7 billion on a border wall that experts have stated will not do what the President has promised. Our country faces many challenges. Opioid epidemic, increasing effects of climate change, the rising cost of prescription drugs, and infrastructure that is crumbling, and Congress should be working on these issues. So let us stand together. Let us pass a responsible spending bill that will keep the government open, give our local state and governments and our businesses, and most importantly, the American people, the sense of stability this holiday season. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentlewoman from New York reserves. Members are again reminded to refrain from engaging in personalities toward the President. The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I'm pleased to yield as much time as he may consume to the Republican whip, Mr. Scalise of Louisiana.
From Louisiana is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate your leadership on this. And, Mr. Speaker, this is about keeping America safe. This is not a complicated vote, but it's an important vote that really defines whether or not we are going to stand for border security in this country. For decades, it's been promised. There have been bills going back to the 1980s where we were promised that we were going to get a secure border, and it never happened. And so now we have a president who ran on this issue. This isn't something that just popped up. It was front and center during the campaign. And he said, I'm going to secure the border. I'm going to build a wall. And the people on the other side, our Democrat friends, said they didn't want that. Some of them actually said they want open borders. Some on the other side, Mr. Speaker, have said they want to abolish ICE, the very Border Patrol agents that are keeping the interior of America safe. Who are ICE? Who are the people they want to get rid of, Mr. Speaker? Those ICE agents last year alone saved over 900 kids from human trafficking. That's stuff that came across our border. You know, we are a nation of immigrants and a nation of laws. My great-grandparents came here from Italy, and I'm proud of that. We, by the way, Mr. Speaker, let more than 1 million people into this country legally every single year. The most generous country in the world. We should be proud of that. For those people that want to say it's a country of closed borders, this is about getting back to rule of law. This is about keeping America safe and saying there's a legal way to come here. And President Trump has said that. Even on asylum, he said if you want to seek asylum, there's a legal way to do it. But it's pretty hard to claim asylum, Mr. Speaker, when you came through Mexico and you forced yourself across that border, and Mexico said, we will offer you asylum. We will even offer you work permits and a job. And you said no. So it's really hard to say you're claiming asylum here in America when you turned down asylum in Mexico when you were coming across their border. So it's not about asylum. It's about rule of law. What do you say, Mr. Speaker, to the millions of people from other countries all around the world who are waiting, in some cases 10 years, 15, 20 years, to come to America legally? They're waiting in these theoretical lines, and they're doing it the right way. And then you've got a few thousand people that say, we're just going to storm across your border regardless. And the president stands up and says, you know what? I want to secure this border. So then we have a choice to make, Mr. Speaker. Are we going to stand with the president and say we're going to give you the tools to secure the border or not? It's a straight-up vote. You're either for border security or you're against border security. And let's not hide behind it. When you saw that meeting at the White House last week, when you had the Senate Minority Leader and the future Speaker of the House going over to the White House, they didn't want to give the president money for the wall because they didn't want to give him a win. You saw them. They were bragging. They just wanted to assign blame. Are you going to take blame for the shutdown? But they said, we don't want to give you the money for the wall, and they've said it since. So if they've got a personality conflict with the president, don't let the security of this nation get in the way of that. The president said, this is something I believe in because I care about the American people, and I have a responsibility to keep this country safe. And I wish everybody that came here across the border wanted to come here to seek the American dream. But, Mr. Speaker, we know that there are people that have come across this border with ill intentions for our citizens all across the nation. Again, I mentioned last year the 900 children that were saved from human trafficking. My colleagues have talked about the opioids, the illegal drugs that come across our border. Mr. Speaker, the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security says on average every single day in America, 10 known or suspected terrorists tried to come into this country illegally. And some on the other side have said, oh, the number's not 10. Okay, well then what is your number? How many terrorists coming into this country illegally every single day are enough? I say none. There is a legal way to come here, and right now, those are the people, by the way, that we know of. How many people that want to break our laws, that want to do harm to our citizens, that want to jump in front of other people that are trying to come here to America the right way? How many more people have tried to come across that we don't know about because we don't have a secure border? And so we have a president who says, I need tools. And oh, by the way, there are some things that are in law. Right now, we in law tell the president where he can and can't build the wall, what materials he can and can't use. So he's got ideas. Mr. President has shown ideas of how to actually build a better border security wall at a cheaper cost, and yet the law prohibits him from building it cheaper, in a better way, more efficient for the American people. How ridiculous is that? So we remove that in this bill and tell the president he can build the wall however he wants in the most efficient way to keep America safe. So again, Mr. Speaker, as I close, we've got a choice to make. There's going to be a bill before us in a few minutes that we get to vote on to say, are we going to stand up for the rule of law and keeping this country safe and supporting the president's ability to secure America's border or not? You can vote yes or you can vote no, but don't hide behind politics. This isn't about the personality of the person in the White House. It's whether or not we're going to respect the rule of law and keep America safe. I urge my colleagues to vote yes, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from New Jersey reserves. The gentlewoman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Ohio, the ranking member of the legislature, Branch Subcommittee. Excuse me, Mr. Ryan. Thank you.
The gentleman from Ohio is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentlelady. This has been really interesting debate because our friends on the other side, Mr. Speaker, it's like they have amnesia and nothing happened before the election a couple years ago. All of these promises about a border wall were followed by the cheers and the chants of, and who's going to pay for that wall? And you remember all your fans would stand up and Mexico's going to pay for that wall. Who? Mexico. And here we are today getting ready to shut down the government over you asking the American taxpayer to pay for this border wall. And then some of you even used to say, are saying that we have hollow words, that our words don't mean anything. When this president is going back on the promise that he made. He said Mexico was going to pay for it. He said it at the rallies. He was in Ohio. He was in the swing states. And now he's going back on his word on that. And he just went back on his word where he promised the entire Senate he was going to support the continuing resolution. And you're calling us and saying our words are hollow? Are you kidding me? Now look, I'm for border security. I'm for border security, but I'm not for a wall. You know what? I like cars too. I'm for cars. I'm not for the Model T. I like planes. I don't want a glider that was designed and built by Wilbur Wright. I like my phone, but I don't want to go back and get the rotary dial out. You guys are living in the past. And this government is in chaos. It's in a free fall. The market's in a free fall. The staffing at the White House is in a free fall. The Secretary of Defense is gone. We're pulling out of Syria. What is going on? You are in charge of the House, Senate, and White House. Get a grip and learn how to govern the country. I yield back the balance
time has expired. The gentlewoman from New York reserves. Members are reminded that they should direct their comments to the chair. And once again, members are reminded to refrain from engaging in personalities toward the President. Otherwise, they will be ruled out of order. The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized.
The gentleman reserves.
The gentleman reserves. The gentlewoman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentlewoman from Florida, the ranking member of the Military Construction Veterans Affairs Subcommittee, Ms. Wasserman.
Gentleman from Florida is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise in opposition to this legislation. We are at this point because of President Trump's recklessness and House Republicans' refusal to govern responsibly. We are already nearly 3 months behind schedule on completing the fiscal year 2019 appropriations bills. Mr. Speaker, Democrats would prefer to get our work done instead of kicking the can down the road. However, it appears that the only thing that seemed possible for us to accomplish before adjourning for the holidays was to pass the CR until February 8th that the Senate passed unanimously last night. However, after another Twitter tantrum, House Republicans are once again catering to Trump's worst impulses with this terrible bill. This bill wastes billions of taxpayer dollars, fails to fully address the urgent needs of disaster victims, and will fail in the Senate. It is a waste of time for us to consider it. Our country faces many pressing needs, and there is simply no reason to waste $5.7 billion on President Trump's immoral, unnecessary, irresponsible wall. Mr. Speaker, $5.7 billion would completely rebuild Tyndall Air Force Base, rebase the F-22s and F-35s, and completely rebuild all damaged Marine Corps facilities in North Carolina with money to spare. These are facilities and equipment that were wiped out by Hurricane Michael. The disaster supplemental funds in this bill are designed to be a sweetener, but aren't even enough to give us a toothache. Democrats have always been willing to negotiate how best to secure our border, but we will not support the President's boondoggle vanity project that Mexico was supposed to pay for. Likewise, we strongly support a comprehensive disaster supplemental, but this bill completely fails to address mitigation and resilience efforts that will prevent future disasters. We are now less than 36 hours from another Trump government shutdown. Democrats were prepared to bail out Republicans once again by providing the votes to pass a clean CR. Yet they can't take yes for an answer. No wonder voters have said they had enough. This is no time for political games. Can I have an additional 30 seconds, please? This is no time for political
games. The gentlewoman from New York reserves.
It's time to go home for the holidays.
The gentleman from New York reserves. Members are yet again reminded to refrain from engaging in personalities toward the President. The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized.
I'm pleased to recognize Mr. Gomer for a minute. The gentleman from Texas.
The gentleman from Texas recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, and thank you, Chairman. We hear references to an immoral wall. We have heard wall demonized. And yet I read yesterday that President Obama in his new house has constructed a 10-foot wall around his property. Now, either the walls work or they don't. And if we're going to have Democrats continue to say they don't work, then you need to stand up and say, Mr. Obama, tear down your wall. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from New Jersey reserves. The gentlewoman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Illinois, the ranking member of the Financial Services Subcommittee, Mr. Quigley.
The gentleman from Illinois is recognized for 2 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, your point is well taken. I'll address my remarks to you. Mr. Chairman, the arguments we have heard tonight remind us of the tale full of sound and fury, signifying nothing, reminding us who told us that tale. Every border chief since the border chief under President Reagan has said a wall will deter a crosser by somewhere between 90 seconds and 3 minutes. $5 billion for that. If you really want to protect our country, and that's what you're so bent on doing and spending $5 billion, my subcommittee can help you. In January of 2017, with a high degree of certainty, the entire intelligence community said the Russians attacked our democratic process. We are not prepared for their next attack. DNI Coates has warned that the lights are flashing red. We spent $180 million on election security in 2018. Nothing since then. 40 states do not even have sufficient equipment to put on software that blocks this hacking. 13 states don't even have a paper trail. The last time our democratic process was called into question in such matters was during Bush-Gore, where this very body spent $3.5 billion to protect its integrity. We must do better. By the way, you have control of the House and Senate. You don't need to yell at us, folks. You can yell at your own caucus. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized.
I reserve the right to close.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Democrats support strong, smart border security, but we will not allow Republicans to fleece American taxpayers by making them pay $5.7 billion for Trump's ineffective wall. And I want to remind my friends that 88% of opioid seized come through the port of entry. Let's get the facts on the table. I will save my other comments, including praising Chairman Frelinghuysen for his distinguished career in public service, for the debates on a bill that has an actual chance at becoming law. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The balance of her time. The gentleman from New Jersey.
Mr. Chairman, I urge members to vote yes on the bill to keep the government open until February 8th to support critical border security, which is badly needed, and to look after the needs of so many Americans that have suffered from so many disasters over this past year. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. All time for debate has expired. Pursuant to House Resolution 1183, the previous question is ordered. The question is on the motion by the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Frelinghuysen. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. No. The ayes have it. The motion is agreed to without...
I ask for the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, this 15-minute vote on the motion will be followed by a 5-minute vote on the motion to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 6602 if ordered. This is a 15-minute vote. On this vote, the ayes are 217 and the nays are 185. The motion is adopted without objection. A motion to reconsider is laid on the table. The unfinished business is on the question on suspending the rules and passing H.R. 6602, which the clerk will report by title.
Union Calendar number 827, H.R. 6602, a bill to reauthorize the New Jersey Coastal Heritage Trail Route and for other purposes.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill? So many as are in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended. For what objection does the gentleman from Kentucky seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I request a recorded vote.
A recorded vote is requested. Those favoring a recorded vote will rise. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their vote by electronic device. This is a 5-minute vote.
Objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. The chair lays before the House an enrolled bill.
Senate 756, an act to reauthorize and amend the Marine Debris Act to promote international action to reduce marine debris and for other purposes.
The House will be in order. The chair will now entertain requests for 1-minute speeches. For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute. The gentleman will suspend. House will be in order. Please take your conversations out of the aisle, off the floor. Gentleman is recognized. Go on some more. The House will be in order. Please take your colleagues and your conversations off the floor. Gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, as we approach the holidays, I wanted to take a moment to talk about a difficult subject, suicide. Suicide is epidemic in our nation. According to the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, suicide is currently the 10th leading cause of death in the United States, ending 48,000 lives in 2017. For those who are suffering, you need to know you are not alone, and there are many who care about you.
Gentleman, the House is not in order. The House.
All right, folks. So I've been posting it on the chat. So the HR that we were waiting for was HR 695. We actually saw it live. It passed 217 to 185. House passes revised short-term spending bill funding the government through February the 8th. It includes $5.7 billion for the border wall and $7.8 billion for disaster relief. The bill now heads to the Senate. Government shutdown deadline is Friday night at midnight, folks. So the Senate vote will happen tomorrow. We do not know exactly what time it would happen, but we're going to be streaming it live here at Golden State Times. Again, the HR that we were waiting for, it was HR 695. We actually streamed it live here just a few minutes ago. The vote was 217 to 185. House passes revised short-term spending bill funding the government through February the 8th. Includes $5.7 billion for border wall and $7.8 billion for disaster relief, California, and all of those other states that were affected by hurricanes. Bill now heads to the Senate. Government shutdown is Friday midnight Eastern time, folks. We will be streaming the Senate vote tomorrow, so make sure you guys tune in. Subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell. If you would like to help out Golden State Times continue operation, the link is in the description below, or you can go to paypal.me/GST Live. We need your help, folks, as much help as we can possibly get. Thank you so much in advance for your consideration. You can also use Super Chat. Super Chat is a very good way of helping out the channel too. And so yeah, folks, we saw the vote live. It was HR 695.
That thought that a tweet and ending the war was never heard of in the history of the United States. In the course of these 24 hours, we're in the midst of a political collapse, a catastrophic collapse, and a shutting down of the government. Included in the shutting down of the government will be the funding for the State Department and Homeland Security. It is clear that we're at a constitutional crisis, one that requires the attentiveness of this body, and to recognize that the leaving and retiring of General Mathis, who's indicated maybe you can have a Secretary of Defense that fits your thinking. What thinking? And then to hear from North Korea, maybe you can remove the troops off of our border.
Ladies, time has expired.
This is a time for us to speak up, to protect the American people, and not a time to shut the government down. I hope the President is listening. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Maine seek recognition?
I ask for unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, during this joyful time of year, I'd like to give thanks for the improving health of my great state of Maine. Because we've cut taxes and regulations, our small businesses are growing and hiring more workers and paying them more. Maine's 2.7% unemployment is the lowest rate in 50 years. We're rebuilding our military to keep our families safe while supporting 6,000 shipbuilders at Bath Iron Works. We passed legislation that guts online human trafficking, which protects our daughters and our sons. And we've made the biggest financial commitment ever to combat the opioid epidemic, giving thousands of struggling Mainers hope for recovery and better lives. Child poverty in Maine is dropping while education is closer to home where it belongs. We've strengthened Social Security and Medicare so our seniors have more peace of mind. And our veterans, our beloved veterans, are now able to receive their health care closer to home, and our small hospitals that provide those services must get paid on time. Otherwise, interest accrues on the outstanding bills. And Maine's pristine natural environment is living up to our brand, vacation land, the way life should be. Mr. Speaker, Maine families are doing better and better, and I am grateful to have the opportunity to help. Merry Christmas and happy holidays to all, and may God always bless the United States of America and our great state of Maine. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey seek recognition? The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to celebrate the students, faculty, staff, and friends of Linden, New Jersey public schools for spreading holiday cheer while helping those in need. Each year, members of the Linden Public Schools load into buses with Santa Claus and travel through their town to sing carols and collect donations for a charity gift drive. Staff and students put their hearts into planning the event, which they call Caroling for a Cause. This year, they collected more than 1,000 gifts from across the community. Those gifts will help bring smiles to the faces of more than 300 children. Mr. Speaker, this is a season of giving, and the Linden Public Schools are leading by example. I want to thank the students, faculty, and staff who participated, and I applaud Superintendent Danny Robertozzi for supporting Caroling for a Cause. I ask my colleagues to join me in recognizing everyone who participated. They are helping make sure their friends and their neighbors indeed have a Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays. And with that, I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to commend our Republican leadership for today for listening to our conference and putting back into the continuing resolution the needed disaster relief for the southern states and for the West Coast, and the border security measure demanded by most Americans in this country. To not do so, to just accept the product that the Senate punted over here, would have been a travesty and a dereliction of our duties here, I think, in the U.S. House. These are very important things that need to be done, need to be accomplished with the caravan amassing on our southern border and the security measures that, although heroically done so far by our Border Patrol folks, they need to have augmented with this asset. And heaven knows, our southern states having affected by hurricanes, farmers depending on decisions to be made in this place, and on the West Coast with the fires in my own district, the stability needed from the funding that would come from a disaster relief package. I'm really pleased to see the work of the House today to put this back out there, send it over to the Senate, where I hope they will have the guts to actually deal with it. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 3rd, 2017, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Al Green, is recognized for half the time until 10 p.m. as the designee of the Minority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd also like to thank the leadership on both sides of the aisle for extending this opportunity for us to speak tonight. This is an important issue for all Americans. We rise tonight on behalf of Mr. Michael Wynn, an American citizen. Mr. Michael Wynn, an American citizen who was on a mission of mercy to Vietnam and who is being detained in Vietnam. I would ask that persons please not allow the last name Wynn to cause you to think anything other than the fact that he is an American citizen who makes America the beautiful a more beautiful America. He was on a mission of mercy. He is being detained. Being detained without the benefit of bail, something that we routinely expect to be the case in this country. Being detained without the benefit of a lawyer, something that we are all entitled to under the Constitution in this country when charged with criminal offenses. Being detained without the benefit of a speedy trial, something that we take for granted. Being detained in Vietnam, Mr. Speaker, this is something that every American ought to be concerned about when we have one of our own being detained without the benefit of bail, without the benefit of a lawyer, without the benefit of a speedy trial. Mr. Wynn is a resident of California's 45th district. And Mr. Wynn is being represented by Ms. Walters. Ms. Walters is here tonight. I know that she has been engaged and involved in doing what she can to help extricate Mr. Wynn from his circumstance. So I will yield at this time to Ms. Walters, California's 45th. Ms. Walters.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to demand the Vietnamese government immediately release Michael Wynn, an American citizen and Orange County resident who has been unjustly detained for over 5 months. Michael is a loving husband and father of 4, a small business owner and an active member of his community and church. He has no criminal record in the United States. This summer, while visiting elderly relatives, Michael was arrested by the Vietnamese government. He is under investigation for allegedly violating Article 109 of the Vietnamese Criminal Code, Activities Against the Government. Article 109 is an arbitrary and vague charge the Vietnamese government often uses to justify baseless arrests. Michael could be held for months without formal charges as the Vietnamese government investigates. Despite repeated requests by my office, the Vietnamese have yet to produce any evidence substantiating Michael's arrest. These unjust actions are further exasperated by the Vietnamese government denying Michael's family's request to visit him while in prison. During the investigation, the Vietnamese government only permits monthly visits by the U.S. State Department. These visits are the only opportunity Michael has to hear messages from his loved ones. Mr. Speaker, Michael's family has been devastated by this ordeal. I had the opportunity to meet with them again just this last week when I was back in Orange County, and I'm here tonight on their behalf to echo their calls for his safe return. The Vietnamese government has not only denied an innocent man his freedom, it has completely disrupted the lives of a loving wife, 4 young daughters, and countless friends and family members across the country who are praying for Michael's homecoming every single day. Michael's wife, Helen, is a nurse who works long hours with many emergency on-call days. During Michael's absence, she has been a single mother to their 4 young daughters. The girls miss their father dearly. His detainment has made it difficult for them to focus on their schoolwork and their extracurricular activities. These girls should not have to spend one more sleepless night worried about their father's safety. Their entire family has demonstrated incredible strength during this ordeal. I am constantly inspired by their love and devotion to Michael. Mr. Speaker, this unjust detainment has gone on far too long. Michael's detainment is the only most recent example of Vietnam's troubling human rights record and lack of transparent legal system. Earlier this year, the Vietnamese government unjustly detained William Nguyen, an American citizen of no relation to Michael. I am deeply concerned for Michael's safety and well-being, and I demand his release immediately. In the meantime, I call on the Vietnamese government to allow Michael's family to visit him in prison. Mr. Speaker, as you can imagine, this time of year is especially difficult for Michael and his family. While most families across our nation will have the opportunity to spend time together celebrating Christmas, the Nguyen family will cope with Michael's absence. This Christmas, I pray for good news for the Nguyen family. Michael's story has touched so many people. Several of my colleagues have heard of Michael's detainment and have joined in my fight to secure his release. I am grateful for their support and their willingness to join tonight's special order. While I will not be returning to Congress next year, I am confident that my colleagues will continue the fight to bring Michael home. And I'm extremely grateful for my colleagues' engagement, and I will continue to support their efforts any way I can as a private citizen. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, and I thank you for the outstanding work that you've done to extricate Mr. Nguyen. At this time, we will yield time to a person who came to Congress and has done outstanding, great job since he's been here. I don't know whether he came to be a freedom fighter, but that's how I know him. He really takes a stand against injustice. And I'd like at this time to recognize Mr. Lou Carrera, California 46.
Mr. Speaker, today I rise to address this body, and I demand that the government of Vietnam respect human rights, religious freedom, and international law as it pertains to an American citizen, Michael Nguyen, who is being held without formal charges in Vietnam under arrest. This unjust imprisonment raises issues, especially since He has never broken the law in the United States. He's a loving father, member of the local church, business owner, a model American citizen. Yet when he was traveling to Vietnam to visit his elderly relatives, he was arrested. Why? We don't know. But apparently he's been arrested for activities against the people's government. Yet we don't know the circumstances or the reasoning. We ask one very simple thing from the government of Vietnam: to play by the rules, respect human rights, respect for religious freedom, and to release Mr. Michael Nguyen, an American citizen who's being detained without formal charges. I urge that he be safely released and that he be returned to his family in the United States. With that, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for his words, powerful words, and look forward to our continuing to work together to extricate Mr. Nguyen. At this time, Mr. Speaker, we will yield to another member who has been involved and engaged in this process, who has been with us on phone calls when we've talked to our ambassador to Vietnam, who has been a party to our contacting our Secretary of State. And I'm honored to ask that he say words at this time, Mr. Ted Yoho of Florida's 3rd District.
I'd like to thank the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Green. Thank you for organizing this special order. And it's an honor to be here to advocate on behalf of one of American citizens. I have the honor of chairing the Asia Pacific Subcommittee on Foreign Affairs, and I've been to Vietnam. And I've got to meet with their prime minister, with their ambassadors, with so many people over there. Vietnam and the Vietnamese people are a wonderful people. And, you know, they've got a society that's a communist society, but it's opening up. Vietnam has made great strides in the last 15, 20 years, moving in the direction that we would like to see. An open society, free markets, as much as they can be in a communist country. But when I was there, the thing that surprised me was the vibrancy of the people, their outlook on life. They yearn for freedom and liberties just like all people do. That's an innate thing that our Creator has endowed all of us, is with that yearning of freedom and liberty. And I became aware of Michael Nguyen's plight, and we've intervened on phone calls, we've written letters, we've talked to the incoming chair of the ASEAN.
All right, folks. So we have some breaking news here. If you guys knew about the GoFundMe account, it's called We the People Will Fund the Wall. It is about to hit the $10 million mark of its goal of $1 billion. This has been raised by 149,515 people in the span of 3 days. So it's set to hit $10 million, folks. That's a lot of money. I'm pretty sure you guys can find the link for it on the internet, Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, all that stuff. So it's about to hit $10 million in 3 days, folks. That's amazing.
I think what you have here is a case where a person was caught up in something. If you look at his past here and his record here, and the people we've talked to in Vietnam, this is a good man. This is a family man that went over there for honorable reasons. And so we asked the people of Vietnam to look into this matter and to address this and do what's right. Do the humanly right thing. You know, if you're a parent, if you're married, you've got mother and fathers, you've got a spouse, think of your children.
One thing that I forgot to say, folks, do not post the link on the chat here because Nightbot will ban you. So just, we do that for any link, no matter where it's going to. Even our own, if someone posts something of our own website, Nightbot will still take it down. So like I said, you guys can find it on Twitter. You guys can find it on Facebook, on Reddit, on Gab. It's all over the place. Patriots are sharing it all over the place. So just go and put Wall GoFundMe on Twitter and you'll find the link there. Just don't post it on the chat because Nightbot will ban you. Thank you very much. Again, we do that for any website. It doesn't matter what it is. Even for the White House website. If someone posts a link for the White House website or for the State Department or whatever, then Nightbot will take it as a link, and then, it'll time you out and it'll ban you. So.
But I can say this. If human rights issues get in, as Mr. Green brought up, this is one of our own American citizens. If Vietnam overlooks these things, it's going to be hard for us as a nation to move forward with them in relationships. So I'm going to plead with the Vietnamese leadership to expedite the case of Michael Nguyen and do what's right. Return him back to America, return him back to his family, and let's try to do that before the end of the year. And I appreciate Mr. Green for doing what you've done. You've done a stellar job. And I appreciate all the members that have stood up for this people. These are things that happen in Congress that the American people don't know we do, that they should applaud both sides. This is not a partisan issue. This is an American issue that we all should be proud of, that we're fighting for somebody that's an American citizen. And I know Vietnam, if they're listening, and I'm sure they are, they'll do the right thing. And the right thing is to return Michael. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman, and I would want to reiterate what you've said about this being a bipartisan issue. This is an issue that crosses the lines that sometimes divide us. There is no chasm between us when it comes to the extrication of Mr. Nguyen. We want him back. I'd like to call to the attention of all who are within the sound of my voice, who are viewing this at home, that there's another member who is not here tonight, but who has played a significant role in this effort to bring Mr. Nguyen home. He is Mr. Alan Lowenthal. Mr. Lowenthal is from California's 47th Congressional District, and he has been a real champion on causes such as this. He understands the laws of Vietnam. He understands the culture of Vietnam as well as any. And he has really had a major push to try to get Michael home. So, Mr. Lowenthal, I want to thank you for what you've done. While you are not here physically, I do know that you're here in spirit. What has been said about his detention, about Michael's detention, is eminently correct. Michael is being detained without bail, as has been indicated previously. And in Vietnam, unfortunately, the investigation can go on for weeks, months, and can exceed a year. When investigations go on for this length of time, and the person being detained does not have the opportunity to visit with family members, denied access to family members during holiday seasons, such as what's occurring here now in our country. When a person is detained without the benefit of bail, without the benefit of speedy trial, when this happens, unfortunately, the detention itself becomes punishment. The detention itself becomes egregious. The detention itself becomes reason for us to complain to the government of Vietnam. If you have charges, yes, you should investigate, but you should file your charges. You should not detain and then at some point have some charges brought that may or may not necessitate a long period of additional detention. This is an American citizen. We have expectations. We believe that every country has a right to its autonomy. Every country is a sovereign unto itself. But we also believe that every country should respect the human rights and dignity of people who are within the confines of their country. And Mr. Wynn has a necessity to be with his family, his 4 young children. They miss him. They want to be with him. This is their father who is expected to be at home, especially around this time of year when we are all celebrating the holidays, many different holidays, but they're celebrated in this country. And we are making an appeal, a hue and cry, a clarion call to the government of Vietnam to release this husband, release this father, release this man who has been on missions of mercy to Vietnam to work with his wife as a volunteer when they are helping young children to receive surgery. He has demonstrated his love for the people of Vietnam. He has demonstrated his willingness to go above and beyond to be of service to the people of Vietnam. And I ask that the government of Vietnam release him. Let him come home. If you have charges, sure you should file them. But if not, let's not allow the investigation to become a form of punishment. I want to thank all of the members who have appeared on the floor tonight. There are others who would be here, but circumstances do not permit. And I want to thank the leadership for allowing us to get this message out to the masses, to the American people, and hopefully to officials in Vietnam. I want to thank the Secretary of State and our ambassador to Vietnam for their intervention. We're all doing as much as we can, but we all have to do more. And until he comes home, we have not done enough. Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 3rd, 2017, the gentlewoman from New York, Ms. Tenney, is recognized for 60 minutes as a designee of the Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to recognize a few special constituents in my region who deserve recognition. First, this past October, the Mohawk Valley lost a local businessman, leader, and a dear friend when Bill Shinatry, owner of Shinatri's Hometown Market in Utica, New York, passed away at the age of 89. Bill was raised in Utica and graduated from the highly acclaimed Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, many of you know as RPI, and enjoyed a 40-year career as an engineer, eventually serving in the Army Air Corps, or the Army Corps of Engineers in Japan during the Korean War, and later he joined General Electric's Aerospace Electronics Division, where he served as a project manager for the U.S. Navy E-2C surveillance radar team in Utica, New York. Shinatry's, the restaurant, or the family business, the grocery store that was founded by, in 1912 by Bill's father and his 2 uncles. In 1991, Bill eventually retired from General Electric, GE, and became the president of Shinatry's and oversaw a significant expansion and innovation using his unique skills in engineering to really bring Shinatry's into the forefront and to maintain it as a family, home-owned business catering to the needs of families in our community. But along with all these lifelong achievements that Bill had, Bill's legacy is better defined by his terrific family, his loving wife, Janet, and his 5 children, Amina, Joanne, Bob, and Mark, and of course all of their children, grandchildren, and many great-grandchildren as well. The strong personal relationships that Bill cultivated with so many people in our community are thanks to his integrity, his loyalty, his ultimate belief in the goodness of humankind, and much of the love that he had came from his very strong devotion to faith. He also was known to attend daily Mass. But he also was such a good friend to so many as he worked in his sort of post-retirement, his post-GE life, retirement life as Shinatry's. Bill's son, Mark, a longtime friend of mine, dear friend, stated that his father's greatest lesson to him when it came to rebuilding the #1 grocery store in Utica year after year is simply that Shinatry's business was built on treating people right, and that was Bill's message. Mark and his family continue that great legacy left by their father, Bill. It's really hard to imagine to anyone who's been to Chinatries to walk through any day and not see Bill attending to every aspect of the business, taking the time to talk to individuals, to help consumers and people coming in and individual customers every single day. It was a big part of his life, and he was also just hard to miss. He was full of energy, full of excitement, a lot of fun to be around. And our community will dearly miss Bill Chinatry, and especially his friends, his family, his customers. But our entire community really lost a true leader, someone who was always able to innovate and actually reinvent himself, and someone who, I think what's most important, actually made a difference. Next, I'd like to recognize another really terrific member and dear family friend of my family. I'd like to honor the incredible life of a man named James Van Slyke, ended up of New Hartford, New York. Jim Van Slyke passed away on June 6, 2018, one day before his 89th birthday. He is survived by his loving wife of 62 years, Virginia, as we all know her as Ginny, his children Matt, Patrice, Andy, and Mary, his grandchildren, great-grandchildren, nieces, and nephews. Hailing from Hamilton, New York, Jim stayed in his hometown after high school, attending Colgate University, also in Hamilton, received a full academic scholarship.
All right, folks, thank you very much for joining us and choosing us as your stream of choice. We are set to shut down. The Senate vote for the bill is going to happen tomorrow. So make sure you guys tune in here at Golden State Times. Subscribe to the channel. Click the notification bell if you are new to the community. We hope that you guys join us and you join our family here at Golden State Times. Again, the funding bill will happen. The vote will happen tomorrow in the Senate. So make sure you guys tune in to Golden State Times for that. We don't know 100% what time it's going to happen, but make sure you guys follow us on Twitter and Facebook, and then we'll give you guys the time frame in the morning. Again, thank you so much for choosing Golden State Times as your stream of choice. We hope that you guys have a good night, and we will see you tomorrow bright and early in the morning and getting ready for another day right before Christmas. So make sure you guys tune in. If you guys would like to help out Golden State Times continue operation here on YouTube, the link is in the description below, or you can go to paypal.me/GST Live. Thank you so much, folks, and I'll see you soon.